Everybody good to go? Feedback? If I like scream into the mic, will that help? Okay, I appreciate you all coming out today. As we announced a little over a week ago, our process in this search has advanced to the point where we were able to identify our first victim in this process, Mr. C.L. Daniel. That is at the end of what has been a multi-year process, beginning with historical research, leading to geophysical scanning, then moving on to core sampling, test excavations, further excavations, full excavations. Then when remains were identified that seemed like they might be consistent with what the historical record was telling us, those individuals were exhumed, that at least that had been identified to that point. And then DNA, as best as possible, was recovered from them, and then fed into a genealogical and DNA database, which led us to Mr. Daniel's family. Now that's a 60-second summation of 5 to 6, well really, if you're being honest about the historical work, about a quarter century of work to get us to this point. All of this is based off of and there's a lot of challenges for us in this, in that the documentary, record keeping around the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre was intentionally not very thorough. And so our team of experts have had to work in trying to find individuals who were hidden and buried in a process where we didn't know who they were or where they were buried. The one thing that we do know, thanks to an invoice and a receipt that was identified by our historical research team, is that there were 18 victims that Tulsa County paid for them to be buried in Oaklawn Cemetery. And that has been the main focus of our efforts in the cemetery to date. This is the one place where we have documentary evidence, not somebody's oral history or testimony, but literally in writing. We know that there are 18 race massacre victims, unidentified, buried in that cemetery. Mr. Daniel is, I believe, the first one of those that we've found. Well, that leaves, at a minimum, 17 more individuals that we need to be able to identify to give their families the same opportunity for a proper burial that we are working with Mr. Daniel's family to give him. And a big part of this, we're fortunate that the work to date, there are a number of individuals whose DNA profiles are being developed, and that other genetic relatives have been flagged for further work, just like Mr. Daniel's family had been, but we haven't been able to identify them yet. We also know that there is a significant area in the part of the cemetery where Mr. Daniel was buried that we have not excavated yet. And so today our team is back at it to continue that excavation and continue that work moving forward. I think there's a couple things that have changed a lot since the last excavation that we did. First of all, this further excavation is the recommendation of our technical team. At every step of this process, At the City of Tulsa, we have viewed our role as to help facilitate the work of these experts so that they can focus on finding our neighbors who were murdered. Their recommendation to me was that they continue this excavation in this specific area, and so thanks to the support of the Tulsa City Council, we had that included in the budget that I presented to them. It was adopted, and we're moving forward with that today. Another key thing has changed, though, that I think is really important, which is that the profile that our team is looking for when they're looking for remains in the ground has been proven out with Mr. Daniels' identification. They have been looking for individuals buried in plain wooden caskets, even if they don't show signs of trauma, which very importantly, Mr. Daniels' remains do not show signs of trauma. But he fit a profile in that his body was placed in a casket that was too small for him. It was a standard plain wooden casket, which is exactly what they are looking for. So we know that the profile that they're looking for has borne out. We also know now that Mr. Daniel, the area that he was buried in, is also right next to the only two race massacre victims who we know are buried with headstones in Oaklawn Cemetery. So now we have a general area of focus within a much larger cemetery for them to be focused on, and that's where this excavation is going to be moving ahead. So all of this, I'm really grateful for the citizens of Tulsa sticking with this process. This has not been a quick process, and yet everything that we have done to date has improved our understanding of what's underground in Oaklawn Cemetery and where things are. And every excavation that we do increases our knowledge of where remains are in that cemetery, and potentially then giving our forensic experts the opportunity to assess them and do the same type of work that's been done with Mr. Daniels' remains. So I'm incredibly grateful, that there are ideal times of year to be doing this work out in the field. July and August in Oklahoma is not one of those times. But again, I think it speaks to the level of personal commitment that this research team has, that they didn't want to wait. They wanted to get out there as quickly as possible and continue this work. And I, on behalf of the citizens of Tulsa, I just want to reiterate how grateful we are for their expertise, their knowledge, and their personal devotion to this work. I'm going to turn it over now to a person who's led this from the very beginning, our state archaeologist, Dr. Carrie Stackelbeck.
Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Carrie Stackelbeck, the state archaeologist of Oklahoma, housed within the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. It's nice to be back here in Tulsa, so thank you all for having us back. So as the mayor mentioned, we are restarting our excavation process today. This is going to look generally very similar to recent excavation processes that we have engaged in the past 3 years. We are going to start today by doing some basic mapping work so that we can reorient and get ourselves back to the places where we need to be. We are expanding our excavation blocks that we have done previously and trying to basically fill in some gaps where we are close to Burial 27, Burial 3, the headstones for Reuben Everett and Eddie Lockhart, and some of our other individuals of interest based on those markers, based on those criteria that the mayor referenced. Males buried in simple wooden caskets. And so we are going to be expanding our excavation blocks to more fully encompass that southwestern corner of the cemetery. And then we are also going to be expanding our excavation block to kind of bridge the gap between our two larger excavation blocks from last season. Today it's going to be a little bit of slow going just as we kind of get everything oriented and get our positioning correct and stake out the locations where we're going to be opening up those new excavation blocks. This first week we'll have a relatively small team out there where we will be doing backhoe work and removing the overburden that is above the level at which the graves are located, and then basically getting down to that level where we will encounter just above where those caskets are. So we won't be actually excavating individuals this week. We're just mostly going to be getting that overburden off the top, so that next week when our fuller team arrives, then we'll start doing that hand excavation, the more fine-tuned hand excavation, in order to actually expose those graves more specifically and determine which ones are going to be candidates for exhumation according to those criteria. Our forensic team, led by Dr. Phoebe Stubblefield at the University of Florida, will also be returning next week, and they will begin their process as we exhume individuals, as we've done previously. As we exhume remains very carefully, and we do very careful, cautious documentation while they're in place. Once we exhume those individuals, we will be transporting them to our on-site forensic laboratory, where Dr. Stubblefield and her team will then engage their process to examine those remains. So it's all going to be very similar to how we've done it previously. We're just deploying these efforts in slightly new locations this time around. So I think one thing too is just reiterating, the mayor really articulated this all and summarized it very nicely. Context is really critically important here, and positioning in proximity to the burials that we know are really hitting the mark for what we're looking for, who we're looking for, both in terms of trauma victims with burials 27 and 42 who are gunshot victims, and then now we know with burial 3 being a named victim as well. All of that's critically important, and so we're just making sure we're sticking to that same area, and we're hoping to encounter additional individuals that we believe are going to fit our profile for massacre victims. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to our community liaison for the 1921 Graves investigation, Ms. Brenda Nails-Alford.
Hello. As mentioned, we are truly, truly grateful to have this opportunity to move forward with these processes to find victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre, as this is a very integral part of the history of Greenwood and Black Wall Street. I think of our community members who lost family and who lost friends and neighbors that they never saw again, and did not have the opportunity to memorialize them in the manner that they would have wanted to. I am just so grateful for Mayor Bynum and the City of Tulsa for allowing these processes to move forward after so many years. It means so much to our community. And for our wonderful team members who do the hard work of excavations and doing the scientific studies and the forensic analysis to bring us to the point that we are today, to bring us the answers that we are looking for. The work that they do is just amazing. They're out there in the heat, in the cold. I am just so very, just excited about this situation because I've learned so much as we've gone along about what it takes to do this work, the hard work it takes to do this work, and I am totally, totally grateful. So today, as we move forward, it is my honor to stand with our community and our city to move forward with these processes. When I'm doing this work alongside our team members, it reminds me of that old saying, don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I also want to thank, we have a lot of folks on our technical team who've come here to Tulsa, including the team from Stantec that just does outstanding work. This is, as you might imagine, really painstaking, careful work that they do out in the field, and it requires a high level of expertise. We've been fortunate because of the nature of this search to attract the best in the whole country to help us out here, but we really appreciate all of them coming to Tulsa to keep doing this work. I also want to just reiterate for folks who may be watching this who haven't followed this previously but heard about Mr. Daniel, the key for us being able to identify him was that his family members had DNA in an online database. And were cooperative with genealogical experts who reached out. So we would strongly encourage, if you see, and we've put the names out of family members, DNA relatives, if those names look familiar to you and you're anywhere in America, by the way, Mr. Daniel's family wasn't from Oklahoma. We didn't identify him because people from Tulsa heard about this and got involved. And the same could be said for any of the victims. At this point, when you're talking about people who were murdered 103 years ago, their descendants are all around the world today. And so we'd ask that people, if you hear about this, you don't have to know that you have any connection to Tulsa at all. If you see your name listed in the list of names that we put out there, that surname sounds familiar, and the part of the country that that's listed in association with it sounds familiar to you, please check out our website. You can just visit cityoftulsa.org/1921graves. There's also completely independent work done by Intermountain Forensics. If you want to talk with them about how they do this DNA and genealogical work, you can reach out to them. But the cooperation of people around the world at this point is what's going to help us close that final gap in making these identifications. Our technical experts can only do so much out in the field, and then it requires the cooperation of descendants for us to be able to make that final identification, as it did in the case of Mr. Daniel. So we really appreciate the media's help in getting the word out on this. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Some of the remains that have already been exhumed or uncovered in some of the previous phases?
Thanks, Randy. So the question was, does our team anticipate re-exhuming any of the remains from previous phases of our investigation? We would not anticipate doing full re-exhumations, but there is at least one individual that we would probably like to go back and extract additional samples because the original efforts to pull DNA from the samples that were collected initially did not quite yield the results that we were hoping for, that the IMF team was hoping for, to be able to have greater success. So we do have one individual that we may actually be obtaining some additional samples from. That's not 100% certain right now. That's just something that we're discussing right now, and we'll finalize that with our forensic team when they return next week. But that is a possibility. But we would probably do that just on site and not actually have to re-exhume that individual entirely. We know that there were grave shafts associated with those headstones, but we did not do any further effort to excavate those graves or to expose those remains in any fashion. So we know all we can do is we can confirm that there are grave shafts there, and we did do metal detecting that would have otherwise indicated the positions where you would anticipate having hardware like nails at the corners of those positions of the dark stain that represents the location where the grave shafts are, but we don't know anything further beyond that for those locations. But we had enough visibility of that we did include that on the map, so you will see that on the maps that have been distributed. Those are included.
The question is, what does this investigation, the excavation, and the exhumations, what does it mean for Tulsans who don't know if they're related to the massacre? I think this is something that every Tulsan should be able to relate to. And the analogy that I've used before, but I think it's always important to bear repeating, just imagine that your grandparent left home, was told they needed to leave home in the middle of the night because there was a riot going on. They left. They were locked in the Coliseum for 3 days, or you were locked in the Coliseum, and you got out 3 days later and your grandparent's missing. And you never knew what happened to them. You assume they died in the race massacre, but you have no idea what happened to them or where they are. By the way, that's exactly what happened to Mr. Daniels' family. And for at least 18 families, probably more, but we know we have documentary evidence of 18 families that is the case. So imagine putting yourself in those families' shoes and knowing that you had a family member who disappeared and then the city never tried to find them. No one was ever prosecuted for what happened to them or to you. How would that make you feel about that city? And that's the reality of what Tulsa did for these families for a century. Now today, any family in Tulsa, if somebody in your family was murdered, you would expect, rightfully, for the city to find out who did that to them and to find their remains so you could give them a proper burial and mourn their loss. This generation of Tulsans can't go back in time 100 years and do what the city should have done in 1921 and 1922. But we can do the right thing right now. And so that is what this generation of Tulsans is trying to do with extraordinarily difficult technical circumstances, with descendants who are scattered around the world at this point, many of whom don't even know that they're related to victims of the massacre. And I am grateful that this generation of Tulsans is trying to do that right thing. And that is everybody. This is making sure that everyone in our city has that level of expectation that you should be able to rely upon. And I've been pleased since we started this. I think in the past there was this mistaken belief that there'd be this big pushback, that people wouldn't want us to do this. I've had almost no pushback since we launched this investigation. Doesn't matter the political party, doesn't matter the part of town people live in, doesn't matter the race. When you explain this investigation that it's not some historical curiosity, that it's a very human investigation, and everybody that's been involved in this is relating to these victims as our neighbors, not as somebody, some number in a grave shaft or some person out there. We want to find their identities. And one of the things I've loved that's happened, and I want to thank the media so much for the way you've done this in the last week and a half, is the way that Mr. Daniels' story has been told. We want the stories of these victims to be told. Mr. Daniel was never, to my knowledge, ever mentioned in relation to the race massacre outside of his own family's correspondence with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. He wasn't on the radar at all. And in the last week and a half, the whole world has heard about his story and his life. Well, we should expect every victim to have that same type of opportunity. That's our goal with this. So, all of that to say, I'm giving you a very long answer to your question. But I think every Tulsan should be able to relate to this as our neighbors, whether they lived here 100 years ago or yesterday. When our neighbors get murdered, we're going to do everything we can for them and their families. And that's the most quintessential Tulsa thing there is. We watch out for one another in hard times, whether those hard times are going through a flood or a tornado, or those hard times were 103 years ago through a race massacre. We'll do what we can for our neighbors. I think Dr. Stakelbeck said it very well at our last press conference. I think one of the great things, besides just the emotional lift of finding Mr. Daniel after such a challenging investigation, is that it's proven out that we're looking for the right profile in the right place. And our hope is that that then allows this investigation to move along at a quicker pace and on a surer footing than perhaps we were before, when every excavation we've done, we have learned a tremendous amount that's helped. Everything has built upon that every step of the way. But we're now at a step in this investigation where what we're learning is helping us narrow in on. We've gone from, 25 years ago, you could say the whole city, anywhere in Tulsa, people might be looking for these victims. And then you had the state commission that narrowed it down into a handful of sites. Then you had our scanning that narrowed it down into about 3 or 4 locations. Then you had the test excavations that narrowed it down into specific areas. And now the discovery of Mr. Daniel has us in that very specific area within that cemetery. And so I think that gives us tremendous hope that we're looking in the right place. We're going to be able to find, at the very least, the 18 that we know are buried somewhere in Oaklawn. We're looking in the right spot in Oaklawn. And then moving ahead, our hope is that we'll get cooperation from the descendants of these victims to where we can make those matches with identification as well. And it's easy to gloss over this, but we shouldn't. We could not have made that match 5 years ago. The technology that allowed us to identify him didn't exist 5 years ago. In fact, didn't exist a year ago. This is the first time this has ever been done in human history, the type of DNA and genealogical matching that's occurring right now. And you only get that DNA because the folks out in the field identify a profile that looks correct, and then the forensic team identifies the DNA and is able to extract it and then turn it over to this team, which is able to run it through databases and technology that didn't exist previously, which allows us to make this match. I mean, we are in exactly the right time in history to be making these matches. And so that also gives me great confidence that we have the technological tools at our disposal to make these matches for these families. To emphasize, the 30-year-old tree. This is, I know, but I just want to emphasize for those who don't know, this is not some 200-year-old historic oak tree. This is a tree that wasn't, at least I believe on our satellite mapping, wasn't even there in 1993. So it's a fairly young tree. But now, go ahead.
So Randy's question is about the removal of the tree and what's that going to allow us to do in terms of the investigation, and then what was your second question? The follow up on that was basically, was it a volunteer tree? I don't. It does not appear to. I don't expect that it's a volunteer tree. I suspect that it was probably planted there, and there have been previous trees in that area. And basically through the previous excavations, we have seen root systems from other trees that were there that are no longer on the surface. But yes, so to the mayor's point, that is not a witness tree. It is a relatively young tree, very fast growing tree, which actually speaks to the environment. This is one thing we were actually observing the tree rings from the stump that's still out there this morning. They're very wide tree rings, indicative of the fact that there's a lot of water moving through this area, and there's also a lot of organic content that's feeding this tree and led it to grow rather quickly. Nonetheless, we've looked all around the base of that tree. We have burials that come right up to the edge of the tree that we know are of interest. So burial 27 is very close to that tree. Burial 3 is close to that tree. And so we knew everything is pointing in the direction of we need to look underneath that tree. We may find no graves there at all, may be devoid of graves, but we don't know that for certain. We just know that we have graves going right up to it, and some of our graves of interest go right up to it. It is a natural progression for us to look underneath the tree. That said, it's going to be complicated, and it's going to be a slower process. Root systems become intrusive, and we will have to deal with that root system as we work with those graves, if there are any that are under that location. The question was if there's any plans to do anything with the tree. We did actually retain a very large section of the tree trunk, and it is an off-site city location. In the event that there is a desire to do something with it, that's not yet determined, but we wanted to at least allow for that possibility. The stump is a different matter. That's going to have to come out. We can't retain the stump just as part of the process, naturally, of us being able to try and get in there to excavate beneath it.
Thank you. Hey. Oh, well, talk.
Make our jobs easy.
Or somebody is on a close frequency with the engine. I mean, because I'm like on 599.5. Yeah, it's got to be the frequency. It was fine. I don't understand why, but I don't understand why. No, if somebody jumped on it, because yeah, it could have been some. I don't know. It's a frequency jump. I mean, it sounds like. Yeah, that. Yeah.
Can we go out there and get video?
Yeah. Yeah, you cannot go in, but you can obviously stay on the fence and do whatever you need. Yes, we will. So, Mayor mentioned this website /cityoftulsa.org/1921 graves. We'll actually have our videographer inside. Any pictures, videos that are taken will be uploaded to that website, and you can use it without courtesing us. And if we do have something that is of obviously significance, we'll have another one of these before the end. That way you all have ample opportunity to talk to Carrie and her team, but we just make those determinations while we're out there. Okay. I'll just let you have the floor.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hey, how you doing? I'm CJ. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Are you from Tulsa?
Oh, I grew up in Springfield, Missouri.
We're not too far.
Not too far away.
I'm rolling.
Come on.
Okay, is it solo? Okay.
No.
Cool. I'm not in your shot, right?
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm good to go.
All right, first you can say your name, spell it for me, and your position.
Carrie Stackelbeck, Kary. Last name is Stakkelbeck. I'm the state archaeologist of Oklahoma, which is at the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey at the University of Oklahoma.
Well, the body of C.L. Daniel was found. What makes you guys so confident that the other 17 individuals could be over there in the same area?
Partially because of the headstones of Reuben Everett and Eddie Lockhart, who are among the named individuals for whom we have death certificates, who are in that same vicinity as well, plus having 2 additional gunshot victims. That certainly adds to our level of confidence. Plus, we also have several other individuals in the vicinity who match our profile of adult male individuals buried in simple wooden caskets. And in particular, a particular sometimes, but it's very personal. And be important here in Tulsa, but can be critical and applied elsewhere as well. So hopefully it's a model that we think can be applied elsewhere. One thing that some places have is there are witnesses or living family members who know where their loved ones may be buried for some of these other circumstances that you're talking about here, because we're talking about we just have so many things kind of working against us, just the passage of time, lack of records, dealing with the cemetery where we have hardly any markers associated with the individuals that we now know are buried in this part of Oaklawn Cemetery. And there were no witnesses to be able to say, we know this is where they were buried, at least not that are still living now. And so this is something where it's so incredibly important. And again, I think you correctly asked, it's just like knowing that it's not just something that's important here, but can be important elsewhere.
Anything else you want to add that we're missing?
I don't think so. I don't know. I probably said way too much already.
Good, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And who do you talk to as far as the technology aspect of this?
So I would say